So the Lancool 3 is available from today, and it probably won't come as a surprise to you that I'm building a PC in it. And this is going to be another full step-by-step PC build guide where I'm going to be taking a really detailed look at the case, showing you all its features, and then I'm going to be putting all the parts I've got in front of me together and coming up with a fully working PC by the end of the video. So the Lancool 3 is available in two different versions, RGB and non-RGB, and each of those versions is available in black and white. I've got the RGB version in black, which has an MSRP of $159.99. The RGB version in white will cost you an extra $10, whereas the non-RGB version costs $10 less than the RGB version. So let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using the MSI Z690 Torpedo. For the CPU, I'm going to be using Intel's 12th Gen i7, the 12700K. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from Deepcool. It's the Castle 360EX ARGB. Because we're using the cooler on a Z690 motherboard, we're also going to need Deepcool's LGA 1700 mounting bracket. For RAM, I've got 32GB of XPG's Lancer RGB DDR5 at 6000 MHz. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 M.2 NVMe drive from XPG. It's their blistering fast Gamex S70 blade, which offers read speeds of up to 7400 megabytes per second and write speeds of up to 6800 megabytes per second. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the Zotac Gaming RTX 3070 Ti AMP Holo. Powering the whole build, I've got a 750 watt fully modular platinum power supply from Cooler Master. It's their XG Plus 750 Platinum. For case fans, I'm going to be using a mixture of Lian Li's SL140 and AL120 uni fans in white. And the final part for today's build is some black and white cable extensions from CableMod. Okay, that's all the parts, let's get building. I'm going to make a start by preparing the case. As we go, I'll point out all the case's features. You'll notice that we've got two aluminium panels on either side of the front mesh panel. They aren't just for decoration, they actually do a job. And you'll notice if I pull this panel, our tempered glass side panel opens up. At the bottom corner of the side panel, we've got a little bit of plastic. It's just there for transportation reasons and can be pulled away. Then we can open up the tempered glass side panel. It's actually a door. And to remove it, all we need to do is lift it up and then it can be taken away. Our other tempered glass side panel is removed in exactly the same way. So we press the aluminium panel on the front to open the door. And then we can simply open up the door, and to remove it, it's just a matter of lifting it up. This one does seem to be a little bit stiffer, so I'm just going to wiggle it side to side and eventually it will come off at the top. Taking a look at our front I/O, and the first two buttons are for controlling the case's built-in ARGB controller. The C button is for the static modes, and each press cycles through the 7 built-in static colours. M cycles you through more dynamic effects, and the first 7 presses will cycle you through 7 different modes. On the 8th press, it will sync with the motherboard, provided you plugged in the ARGB cable at the back of the case to your motherboard's ARGB header. Then we've got a combined headphone and microphone jack, a reset button, a power button, 2 USB Type-A 3.0 ports, and a single USB 3.2 Type-C port. It is possible to move the front I/O to the bottom of the front panel, and I'll show you that later in the video. On the top of the case, we've got a mesh panel. There's a thumb screw at the back which we can loosen, and then the top panel can simply be slid backwards and lifted away. Taking a closer look at the panel we've just removed, you'll see there's no dust filter underneath it, and Lian Li are going with all mesh at the top. Taking a look at the top of the case, we've got a removable fan stroke radiator bracket, and if you are thinking of going with a custom loop, you'll be pleased to see that we've got a fill port. In terms of what you can fit in this bracket, in terms of fans, it's up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, and in terms of radiator support, it's up to a 420mm radiator. If you do decide to go with that, you will need to remove the rear fan. However, with a 360mm radiator, you can leave the rear fan in place. The bracket is removable. If you're going with a 420mm radiator, you need to leave the bracket in and just install your radiator as it is. But with any other size of radiator, you should actually remove the bracket, and I'll show you how to do that now. So we've got 2 screws at the back that we're going to need to remove. With the screws loosened, it should just be a matter of lifting the bracket upwards and then lifting away. With the tempered glass doors removed, our case's front panel can simply be pulled away from the front. Again, if we take a look at the panel we've just removed, you'll see that there's no dust filter behind the mesh at the front as well, and Lian Li are going with all mesh. They say that the pattern in this mesh offers the best balance between airflow and dust filtration by itself, although if you are somebody who prefers dust filters, Lian Li do offer a dust filter kit for the Lancool 3 as an optional extra. With our front panel removed, you'll see we've got three 140mm ARGB fans pre-installed at the front. They're installed on a removable bracket, and if you prefer you can mount three 120mm fans or up to a 360mm radiator. I do want to show you the removable bracket at the front, but to do that I'm going to actually have to free up the cables coming from our fans, which are currently managed at the back of the case, so we'll come back to this. At the bottom of the case we've got a tray style dust filter over our power supply's intake fan. To remove it for cleaning, it simply can be pulled out at the back. Beneath our tempered glass door we've got another mesh panel, which is also a door. It's magnetically attached and it just opens by pulling down from the top. Now once you've removed the front panel, this door is also removable, so all you need to do is put it to the front and it can be lifted away. Moving into the main body of the case, and the Lancool 3 is compatible with motherboards up to E80X in size, up to a maximum width of 283mm. How it does this is you've got this sliding cable cover. There's two thumb screws at the back, you simply need to loosen, and then the cable cover can be slid into whatever position you need it to, and then tighten up the two thumb screws at the back again. You'll see at the rear of the case we've got another 140mm fan pre-installed, although this one doesn't have any ARGB on it. If you prefer, you can mount a 120mm fan at the rear. At the bottom of the main compartment we've got another removable multi-purpose bracket that has three individual panels on it, and each of these individual panels can be used for a different purpose or removed if you want to mount fans or radiators at the bottom. So we take a closer look at these removable plates. You'll see that over the right hand side of each of them we've got mounting holes for pump and reservoir combo. These square mounting holes are for mounting a 2.5-inch drive, and as you can see we've got three of these panels, so you can mount up to three 2.5-inch drives on full display in the main compartment of the case. The other option that you have is to go with fans or radiator at the bottom, and for improved airflow these panels are removable, and you can mount up to three 120mm fans or up to a 360mm radiator with a maximum thickness of fans and radiator up to 80mm. So to remove these panels you've got two screws on the front, and then with the two front screws removed, the panel can simply be tilted up and lifted away. So I am planning on mounting three 120mm fans at the bottom, so I'm going to remove these other two covers. So as I've mentioned, this bracket is removable. It's held on with two screws at the front. And then with the screws removed, the bracket can simply be tilted up and pulled away. So you might have noticed down at the bottom we've actually got two mounting locations for this bracket. So if I slide it back into its position furthest at the back, you'll notice we've got plenty of space at the front for larger radiators and fans. If we slide the bracket this way into its second mounting location, you'll notice the space at the front is more limited, but the advantage that we have at the back is we're going to have more space for tubes should you want the tubes coming out this side of the radiator. So the space you actually have for fans and radiators at the front varies depending on where you set this bottom bracket and also which location you set the front bracket, and I'll show you this in a minute. But depending on those different situations, it's between 55 and 80mm of space for front fan and radiator. If you prefer to go with an air cooler, you shouldn't have any problem fitting a large premium air cooler with a maximum height of 185mm being supported. Similarly, you shouldn't have any problem fitting a large graphics card, with graphics cards up to a maximum length of 420mm being supported. You'll see at the rear here we've got 8 horizontal PCI expansion slot covers, and if you do want to mount your graphics card horizontally, Lian Li include a very nice GPU support bracket in the accessory box, which I'll show you later on. If you do want to mount it vertically, that's not a problem. You can use the vertical GPU kit from the Lian Li 011 Dynamic Evo in this case. You'll notice over to the right hand side we've got multiple slits which can be used for many purposes, for example mounting a pump or a distro plate. Moving into the rear compartment, and again at the bottom we've got a mesh door, again magnetically attached, and it can simply be pulled down. If we take a closer look at the back of this panel, you'll see we've got mounting holes for mounting three 2.5-inch drives. You might be wondering what's the point of it being mesh. if you've got this solid panel on the back. Well, the reason for that is having the solid panel on is optional. If you want to mount drives down at the bottom, you leave it on. If you don't, this solid panel can actually be removed, leaving just the mesh for improved airflow. So I am planning to do this. We've got 4 screws holding the metal panel on. So with the 4 screws removed, the SSD mounting bracket can be removed, and that leaves us just with a mesh panel at the bottom, which should give us improved airflow. Again, this panel is removable for the building process, and all we need to do is slide it to the back and remove it. At the back of the Lancool 3, we've got 2 large cable covers, which are doors that are magnetically attached. So to open the door, all we need to do is pull it out the way. And again, if for the building process, this door is also removable, so all we need to do is lift it up and it can be taken away. The other door can be opened by pulling it out this way, then it simply needs to be lifted up and lifted away. Taking a closer look at the cable management at the back of the case, we've got 3 large Velcro cable straps over to the left hand side, and actually these are going to let you separate the cables into different compartments. So you can see over to the right hand side, these cables have been isolated over here. But when we remove the Velcro, we can also have a separate compartment over to the left hand side as well. So this is going to be quite nice for organising the cables. We've also got 5 shorter Velcro cable straps, and if we open one of them up, you'll notice we've got a metal bracket on one side, which should definitely add support for managing the cables. In terms of cutouts through to the main body of the case, these all do look in sensible locations. It's good to see that the cables at the bottom of the case go directly in from the bottom compartment, so the cables, particularly our power supply cables, aren't going to cause additional problems with management at the back of the case. This is the sliding cable cover that I talked about earlier on. These are the 2 thumb screws that you're going to loosen to move it. Once they've been loosened, you can move this into whatever position you want and then tighten up the bracket. You'll notice that we have got rubber grommets on this sliding cable cover, but all the other cutouts through to the main body of the case don't actually have any rubber grommets on them. So Lian Li have really thought out the cable management, and we actually have 4 mounting locations for a fan hub, such as this one for the Uni fan hub. So they will go in between the Velcro cable straps, or also on this movable bracket. So this bracket can actually be moved to the right hand side if you prefer. There's a thumb screw at the top. It can be removed. The bracket can then be slid over and then the thumb screw replaced. We've got 2 toolless 2.5-inch drive mounting locations here. We've got little pins on the 4 sides of the socket which will line up with the holes in the side of the SSD. This side is movable, it just simply pulls out. So to mount your drive, all you're going to need to do is pull this all the way out, line the drive up with the holes, and then slide it back into place. The holes are going to go into the side of the SSD, and this is really very, very simple for mounting. There is space here for a thumb screw that you can put in, and then that's going to stop you moving this, particularly if you're going to transport with the drive in place. If you do want to remove these, I can't think why you would. But you can remove the 4 screws here and take these away. Moving down to the bottom compartment, our power supply is going to go at the rear, and we've space for drive trays at the front. In terms of power supply support, it's up to full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 220mm, although if you do remove the drive trays, you'll see you have absolutely massive amount of space for your power supply. It's good to see we've got a bracket for our power supply at the back of the case. It's held on with 2 thumb screws. And how you're going to do this, you're going to mount this to the back of your power supply, and then you're going to be able to slide the power supply into the back of the case and secure it with the 2 thumb screws. And the big advantage of this is you're going to be able to install your power supply directly in from the back, which is much easier than sliding it in from the side. Down at the bottom of the case, we've got 2 drive trays, and in each of the drive trays we can mount either a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive. In the case accessory box, we do have 2 additional trays which can be stacked above these 2. To install the additional tray, all we need to do is slide it in from the front. There's a little screw hole at the front that lines up, and then it can be secured into place with a thumb screw. The other drives mounted in exactly the same way. So down at the bottom we can now have up to 4 2.5-inch or 4 3.5-inch drives, which brings the total drive mounting locations in the Lancool 3 to up to 12 2.5-inch drives, are up to 8 2.5-inch drives and 4 3.5-inch drives. The drive trays at the bottom of the case can be moved into different positions. With the front set of drive trays, they can either be installed or removed. If you do remove them, then the second set of drive trays can be moved along into a different position. So to remove the front set, we need to remove the thumb screw at the front, and then the drive trays need to be pulled forward, lifted up, and then they can be removed from the case. With the front set of drive trays removed, we can remove the second thumb screw, and then this set of drive trays can be slid into whatever position you want. Once we've slid the drive tray to the position we want, you'll notice we've got a range of hole mounting locations at the bottom. It can be resecured with a thumb screw. Alternatively, both drive trays can actually be removed. So to do that, we need to slide it all the way to the back, push it slightly forward, and then lift it up, and then the drive tray can be pulled out from the back. Just before we leave the rear of the case, I want to point out these 3 cables. They are standard 3-pin 5V ARGB headers, and they're actually coming from the case's built-in controller. So whatever we plug into here, we're going to be able to use the case's built-in controller to control the lighting, which is going to be really useful. The other thing that I want to do at this stage is talk you through how to install the included fans with the case. The reason for this is I am planning on removing the fans, and the reason for that is I want my radiator at the front. I could of course move the front fans up to the top, but I do have some Lian Li Uni fans sitting about, so I'm going to use these for the build. But I do recognise that most of you buying this case are probably going to use the included fans, and the majority of you that don't will actually probably just replace the rear fan because it doesn't have any ARGB on it. So our 3 front fans come all connected up with a splitter cable for PWM, so you've just got one PWM cable to plug into a fan header on your motherboard. Again, we've got one PWM cable coming from our rear fan, and it's just going to go into a system fan header on your motherboard, similar that I'll show you later on how to plug in the Lian Li Uni fans. The ARGB cables coming from each of the fans again is already plugged into the case's ARGB controller. Then all you need to do is plug this additional cable into one of the 3-pin 5V ARGB headers on your motherboard if you want your motherboard to control the lighting as well. If you're not fussed on that and you're happy to use the case controller, there's no need to plug this cable in. So what I'm going to do now is get the fans removed. So I've freed up the cables coming from our front fans. They are on a removable bracket, but before we remove it, there's 2 thumb screws we're going to have to remove. You don't normally need to use these 2 thumb screws, but Lian Li have them installed for transport purposes. So there's one here, and the second one is at the side. So with our 2 thumb screws removed, the bracket is now only held on with this top latch. So we push the latch in, the bracket can simply be tilted out and lifted away. Then we can remove the fans from the bracket. I now want to talk you through the various options we have for installing the front radiator stroke fan bracket. No matter which of the options you go for, remember it's the bigger standoff with the edge on it that you're going to want to have at the bottom, and the smaller one without any edge at the top. So this bracket can be installed 2 ways round, so you can have it either this way round or this way round. And we've got 2 slots, one here and one here to install it in. So we'll go into the top slot first of all, push it into place, and then push all the way back. To remove the bracket, it's exactly the same thing. We just need to push the lever at the top. The bracket can be tilted out and lifted away. And if we want as well, we can put it into the bottom slot and push it back. Again, to free it up, it's just a matter of pushing the lever at the top and it will come away. As well, it can be installed this way round if you prefer, and pushed in, and similarly in the same way but in the top slot. So you've actually got 4 options for installing this bracket at the front of the case. So this is everything that comes in the accessory box. So we've got our installation guide, we've got the 2 additional hard drive trays that I've already shown you, and we've got a bag containing all the screws we're going to need for the build. So we can open this up and you can see we've got a range of screws all in here, and this looks to be quite a nice box for storing any additional screws in. I'm not going to go through all the screws individually because there's a really nice diagram in the manual which talks you through what to use each of them for. Okay, the next thing I want to do is show how to move the front I/O to the bottom. So this panel is held on with 2 screws. With the two screws removed, our front I/O panel should be free. I have brought all the front I/O cables through from the back of the case, freeing them up from the Velcro cable straps at the back, and then it's just a simple matter of pulling all the cables through to the front. Then we need to pull all the front I/O cables through to the back at the bottom, and then slot our panel into place down at the bottom. We then use the same two screws to secure the panel into place. Then we've got a few modifications to make to our front panel, so we're going to need to swap this and this cover round. So we turn the panel over. You'll see that they're each held on with two screws at the back. Then we need to swap the panels round. Getting this one out, I found the easiest thing to do was just to push it from the back with a screwdriver, whereas this one, it is easy enough to pull off from the end. So we'll pop this one into here, and then this one into here. And then we can secure things at the back with the same screws. We can then set the front panel back into place. So that's what the front I/O looks like down at the bottom. To use it in this position, you are going to have your PC right at the edge of the desk to be able to plug into your USB drives. So unless you have your PC sitting right at the edge of the desk and moved it a little bit back here, you're actually going to struggle to get into the USB ports here. So I can't actually get this drive plugged in because the desk catches. So if this is something you want to do, it's only going to work if you have your PC sitting right at the edge of the desk. I think it looks better at the top, so I'm going to put it back to the stock configuration. So although I'm not planning on installing any SATA drives in this build, for completeness I will show you how to install them in each of the locations we have. So to mount drives on the mesh panel at the side at the back, we're going to want to take these rubber pads and the 2.5-inch drive screws, again these are labelled in the box, pass the screws through so the small end is facing up the way, and screw these into the back of the drive. Then all we need to do is set the drive onto the bracket and push it up into place, and that's going to secure the drive in place. It's exactly the same process for mounting a 2.5-inch drive in the larger drive tray, so the SSD is mounted exactly the same. Make sure we've got it facing towards the back, push it in and forward, and that's the drive secured in place. So in terms of mounting 3.5-inch drives in the drive tray, it's a very similar process, but we need to use the 3.5-inch drive mounting screws, and they are packaged separately, so make sure you use the correct ones and refer to the diagram in the manual. So the same thing is important, we make sure the I/O is facing towards the back, drop the drive down into the tray, and it's probably easier to see this from the other side. So that's it through the holes, and then it's just a matter of sliding things over towards the front, and that's our drive secured into place. To secure a drive on the bottom fan bracket, we need to push these rubber pads with a small end facing down the way through the holes in the bracket. We can then set the drive into place, making sure the connectors are facing towards the back of the case, and turn things over, and then get things screwed into place using the 2.5-inch drive screws. And then if we turn that over, you'll see that's our drive mounted as it would be on the bottom of the main bit of the case. We're now ready to start working the motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our RAM and our M.2 SSD before we put the motherboard into the case. To install our CPU, we're going to have to open this cover, so we need to push this lever down and out and all the way to the top, and then we can open up the cover. We can then set our CPU into the socket, lining the notches at the top and the bottom up with the CPU and making sure the text is the correct way up. Once we're happy everything's lined up, we can close the cover over, and if we apply a little bit of pressure here, quite often the black bit of plastic pops off, and we'll put that into our motherboard box. We can then close the socket cover over and the lever again to secure our CPU. We're going to install our M.2 SSD in the top socket to get the fastest speeds, so we just need to remove the heatsink, which is held on with two screws. We can then insert our drive into the socket at a slight angle, flatten it down, and then we've got this little clip here we can close to secure our drive into place. Importantly, if you are using the motherboard for the first time, there's going to be some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink that you're going to need to remove. We can then replace the heatsink. We're now ready to install our RAM, as we've only got 2 sticks of RAM we're going to need to install it, and the second and fourth one along from the CPU, so we can open the clips on both sides. Then we need to line our RAM up with the slot, Once we're happy we've got everything lined up, it's just some firm pressure through the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And then the same thing with the second stick. We're now ready to install the backplate for our CPU cooler. Now importantly, it's the one that came in the separate LGA 1700 mounting bracket kit. So we just need to remove the plastic covering here. And then we can line the bracket up at the back of the motherboard and push into place. Next we can set the motherboard into the case, lining it up with the standoffs at the back. Then we're going to want to use these screws with a little lip around the outside to secure the motherboard to the case. So you'll notice I didn't put screws into these two holes, and the reason for that is the case comes with a GPU support bracket which we're going to install here. So we need to use these long standoffs from the accessory bag and the tool for securing standoffs. So we can put this in here and put this through the middle hole into the case and secure it into place. And then the same thing at the bottom hole. We've then got this bracket which is going to go between the two standoffs, and we're going to secure it into place using the same screws we used to secure our motherboard to the case. Then we just need to set the red washer from the GPU support bracket bag onto one of the screws that we use to secure the motherboard to the case. We can set the little right angle bracket with the rubber pad on the top, and then we're going to secure this to the back of the case using the screw with the rubber washer on it. So you'll notice I've just put that in quite loosely. What we're going to do is install our graphics card, and this still has quite a bit of travel in this bracket. Once the graphics card's installed, we're going to push up in here so that's an area where it's providing support to the graphics card, and then tighten up the screw to hold it in place. Now I have sized up the graphics card I'm planning on using in the case, and unfortunately in this position here, this is going to be resting right on a fan, preventing it from spinning. And it wouldn't make any difference if we move the bracket along to the end. There's another fan there. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use this GPU support bracket with a particular graphics card that we have. So I'm going to remove it and just install the motherboard using two screws here. We can then move the sliding cable cover over to the correct position and then secure it into place by tightening up the two thumb screws at the back. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header, second from the right hand side at the bottom of the motherboard. So we'll bring our cable through the cutout at the bottom. It is important we line it up the right way because there's a pin missing on the header and there's a hole missing on the cable, and then we'll get it plugged in to place. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. Just below that we've got our USB Type-C connector, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and then again we can pull the excess cable through to the back. We do have one more case cable, although I'm not going to plug it in. This is our 3-pin 5V RGB connector coming from our case's built-in controller. If we plug this into our motherboard and press the buttons in a certain sequence, it will allow our motherboard's RGB software to control the case's built-in controller. Now we have actually removed all our fans from the case, so we're not actually going to use the built-in controller, so it doesn't make sense to plug this cable into our motherboard because it's not actually going to be controlling anything. If you have stuck with the front fans, it does make sense to plug this into your motherboard. The other option that you have is you can disconnect the extension, and you've got another RGB connector here, and this connector would go into a Lian Li Unifan hub if you wanted to work that way. We are now ready to install our power supply, and we have got what's called a fully modular power supply because it comes without any of the cables plugged in. I've already gone ahead and plugged the cables in that we're going to need. So we've got a 24-pin cable, two 8-pin EPS cables, two PCIe cables. Each of these cables has two 6+2 pin connectors, but if you've got a power hungry card like we do, I prefer to use separate cables. We've also got a SATA cable that I've plugged in. Although we're not going to install any SATA drives, we are going to need SATA power for the RGB controller in our case. And I've also plugged in a USB cable because this is a smart power supply and it's going to connect up to our motherboard. You can also see I've plugged in our black and white cable extensions to the end of our power supply cables. This is completely optional, but it will improve the look of the build. The only two downsides to it are cost and increased difficulty with cable management later on, but because it improves the look of the build, I'm going to go for it. Next, we can line up the case bracket for our power supply with the back of the power supply, and then we can secure it into place using 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box. We're now ready to get the power supply into the bottom of the case, and you'll notice I've already passed all the cables through the cutout at the back. Importantly, we are going to want to install the power supply with the fan facing down, where it can get cool air from underneath the case. So all we need to do is slide the power supply into the case, and then we just need to secure it at the back using the 2 thumb screws. Next thing to do is get our power supply cables plugged in, and our 2 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into this header at the top left hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring them through the cutout, line them up with the header and push into place. And then you'll notice we've got some cable combs on the cables to help organise the cables. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we can bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And then again, we've got some cable combs on the cable to help organise the cable. Then we've got our power supply's USB cable. We have 2 headers down the bottom of the motherboard we can plug it into. And we're going to need to plug it in with USB text facing up the way. Last cable to plug in for now is the SATA cable coming from our case, and we can plug it into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. We're now ready to start work on our AIO, and because we have a front mounted bracket, we're going to install it in between the fans and the radiator. So we can line that up into place, and then we can set the 3 fans that come with the AIO into place. Now importantly, we are going to want to have the AIO at the front as intake, so the fans this way is right, and this is going to be towards the back side of the case, and we want the cables running that way. Then we can use the long radiator screws to go through the fans, through the bracket and into the radiator. So I'm just going to talk you through all the cables while we're on the flat table. So we've got a 4-pin PWM connector coming from each fan, and we've also got an ARGB connector. Now, Deepcool do include a little hub for each of these cables. This is the one for the PWM cables, and the fans on it are labelled 1, 2, 4. Now importantly, we are going to have to plug one of the fans into 1, so you're going to want to go 1, 2 and 3. So I'm going to take the PWM cable coming from the first fan, plug it into header number 1, the one from our next fan into header number 2, and then the one from our third fan into header number 3. Then that's going to leave us one 4-pin PWM connector, which we're going to plug into our CPU fan header on the motherboard. We've also got a hub for the ARGB. They're labelled 1 to 5, so we're going to plug our 3 fans into headers number 1 to 3. So we just need to line them up and push into place. We'll take the one from our second fan and plug it into number 2, and then the one from our third fan into number 3. So coming from the end of that hub, we've now got one of these connectors, and we've got 2 options for it. There's a cable that comes with a pack that we can plug into, and then it comes with a standard 3-pin 5-volt ARGB connector on the end for most motherboards, and there's this separate connector here you can use if you've got a gigabyte motherboard. The other option that you have is you can plug this into an ARGB controller that comes with the AIO. So this is the controller here, and all we would need to do is power it with SATA by plugging this end into our SATA cable coming from our power supply. Then you'll be able to press the buttons on the controller to cycle through the various ARGB effects. So the option that I'm going to go for this build is the ARGB cable. So we'll plug it in. So taking a look at the cables coming from our pump, first of all we've got a 3-pin fan connector, and it's going to go into our pump header on the motherboard. The other is an ARGB connector, very similar to what we've been getting from our fans, and we're going to plug that into the ARGB hub. There's a space on the end of it. The next thing for us to do is to put the brackets onto our pump, which are going to allow us to secure it to the motherboard. Now it's important we use the LGA 1700 brackets for our additional mounting kit, and not the ones that come in the box with the cooler. So there's a bit of plastic protection we can take off, and again we're going to have to be very careful. There's thermal paste pre-applied to the water block, so we need to take care not to damage it. So we can set a bracket into place, and then we'll secure it into place with the screws that came with the bracket mounting kit. And then the same thing on the other side. Then we can insert our bracket into the bottom of the case. I'm going for the bottom slot here. I'm going to pass the tubes into the main body of the case, pick them up there, and then push the bracket into place. And that's it, locked. So then we can lower our CPU cooler down into place, line it up with the bracket beneath, and then we'll tighten the screws up in turn. You'll notice that before I secured the cooler, the two cables coming from the bottom of the pump I had passed underneath the bracket here and here. So it's just going to keep the cables nice and tidy, working up towards the top of the motherboard. So at the top of the motherboard, I'm going to plug our 3-pin cable into the pump header. And then we'll pass the excess cable through to the back. And our ARGB cable, I'm just going to pass through to the back. We'll then just get a couple of stickers on the pump to remove. Okay, next thing to do is pass the cables coming from our fans through to the back of the case. Then the next thing to do is get everything plugged back into the hub, just like I showed you on the table. So we've got our 3 PWM connectors. I'm going to plug them into fan mounting locations 1, 2, and 3. We've then got our 4-pin PWM connector coming from the hub, and we're going to pass it through to the front of the case. Our CPU fan header is just here next to our pump header, so we'll get the cable plugged in. Then we've got the ARGB hub, so we'll get the 3 fans plugged into 1, 2 and 3 on it. We've also got the ARGB cable coming from our pump, and it's going to go into the top of this hub. So this just leaves our 3-pin 5V ARGB cable coming from the bottom of the hub, and I'm just going to pass this through to the front of the case and get it plugged into the ARGB header down at the bottom of the motherboard. So I've decided to go with a push-pull configuration at the front, so I'm going to put a set of Lian Li Uni fans onto the radiator. Now these are going to be on display on the inside, and the back of these AL120 fans looks absolutely brilliant. So the first thing to do is join them together. So we just need to push them together and lock them into place like this. Then at the end of the fans, we need to put on one of these connectors. It's just a matter of pushing it into place. So then we can set our Lian Li Uni fans into the case, making sure they're set to intake, the same as the fans on the other side of the radiator. We'll pass the cables through to the back. And then I've got another packet of radiator screws to secure the fans to the radiator. With the AIO, you're only going to get one set of screws, so you are going to have to pick up another set. So I think you'll agree this looks so much better than the black radiator. For my previous testing, I would expect my CPU temperatures to maybe come down by 1 or 2 degrees and the noise to go up by 1 or 2 decibels. But the biggest reason for doing this is just the aesthetics. So coming from our Lian Li Uni fans, we've got 2 cables. One is a 4-pin PWM cable and the other is an ARGB cable. I'll talk you through what I'm going to do with the ARGB cables once we've got all the fans plugged in. Our PWM cable, we want the fans on both sides of the radiators to run the same. And it's great because in our deep cool hub, we have a spare fan slot, which is fan number 4. So if we go ahead and plug this into here, both the fans on either side of the radiator will be running on the same fan curves, which is just the way we want them. If you have gone with a different AIO and still want to do push-pull, what you can do is get yourself another hub, or you can plug it into another header on the motherboard and then configure the fan curves in the BIOS so they run the same. Make sure you check the specifications of your fan headers in the motherboard manual. You'll see here that our CPU fan header can power twice as much as one of our system fan headers. If you're not sure what the specifications are, as a general rule, don't exceed any more than 3 fans in any one header. I'm going to set another Lian Li Uni fan in at the back, and I'm just going to pass the cables through to the back. And then we can screw the fan in at the back using our original rear screws. And the PWM cable I'm going to bring through to the front of the case and plug it into the system fan header down at the bottom. Next, I've got 3 SL140 fans for the top of the case to be set as exhaust, so we can set our top bracket into place. And I've got 3 AL120 fans for the bottom set to intake, so we'll set our bottom fan bracket in place. And then we'll get these screws into place using the screws from the accessory box. First thing I'm going to do is pass the cables coming from our top fans through to the back of the case. I'm then going to set our fan bracket into place. As I lower it down, I'm just going to pull the top cables out of the way. Then I'm going to lower our fans down at the top, and then we can screw the bracket down at the top. We can then replace our top panel. Next, we can pass the cables from our bottom fans through to the back. And then we'll set the bracket up and into place. Then we just need to secure the bracket into place with the 2 screws we removed earlier on. We can bring the PWM cable from our bottom fans through to here and plug it into this header at the bottom of the motherboard. We've got another system fan header here to plug our top fans into, so we'll bring it in through the top and get it plugged into the header. So we now need to connect up the RGB cables from the 4 groups of Lian Li Unifans that we have installed. The standard way to do this would be to use the hub that comes with a triple pack of the fans, use a USB cable into your motherboard and use Lian Li's L-Connect to control the lighting on the fans. So that is option number 1. The other option that you have if you want to plug the cables directly into your motherboard is you can pick up Lian Li's ARGB device cable kit. And using the cables from here, it allows you to plug the fans directly into your motherboard. Now you're going to have limited effects on the Unifans using this method, but I just want them to set them to static white, so it's going to work very well for me. If you did want to more really customize the effects on the fans, Lian Li's L-Connect would be better. The big advantage of this is it's going to be so much simpler. We're not going to have to install any additional software because we're already going to be using our motherboard's ARGB software to control the RAM lighting. So we won't need to download L-Connect to use the fans. And also we'll plug the PWM cables into our motherboard and are going to be using the fan curves there to control the speed. So it makes sense to me to do it this way. So this is the cable that we want, and in the box you get 2 of each type of cable. So we've actually got 2 of these cables in the box. On one end we've got a standard 3-pin 5V ARGB connector, and on the other end we're going to be able to plug a group of Lian Li Unifans into each of these connectors. So each cable of this will let you plug 2 groups of Lian Li Unifans into an ARGB header on your motherboard, and because we've got 2 of the cables and 2 spare ARGB ports on our motherboard, we're going to be able to control all 4 groups of Lian Li Unifans using these 2 cables. Okay, so we can take our front and top Lian Li Unifans and plug them into this cable. And our rear and bottom groups we're going to plug in to the other cable. We've got 2 spare RGB headers. There's one down the bottom beside where we plugged our AIO into, so I'm going to pass this cable through to the bottom. And there's also one at the top of the motherboard, so we'll pass our other cable through to the top. So you can see we've got another ARGB header here just beside the one we plugged our AIO into, so we can grab our cable and get it plugged in. And then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. At the top of the case we've got 2 more RGB headers. The one we want to use is the 3-pin 5V ARGB header, which is next to our pump header. The one to the right of that is a 12V header, and we shouldn't plug into there. So we just need to line our cable up with the header and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our graphics card, so we need to remove the 2nd and 3rd slot cover from the top. Then we can open the clip on the top PCIe slot on the motherboard. Next we want to line the graphics card up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to clip into place. Then we can use the thumb screws we've just removed to re-secure the graphics card. Then we can bring our PCIe cables through from the back of the case and get them plugged into the graphics card. And again, we've got some cable combs in these cables to help organise them. Okay, next thing to do is some cable management so we can get our side panel back on again, but with the amount of Velcro cable straps Lian Li have provided, hopefully this will be straightforward. Okay, so that's the build complete, and we've now reached the important moment where we need to flip the power switch and see what happens. Now importantly, I have loaded a Windows 11 bootable USB drive into the back of the PC. If you don't know how to make one of those, I've made a video on it and you'll find a link to that in the description. Okay, here goes. So that's good. We've got fans and lights. Everything seems to be powering on. So we're just going to need to keep an eye on the screen and see what happens. There's good, we've got the MSI logo. So the next thing we're looking for is the Windows logo to appear. If that happens, it will have found the bootable drive in the back of the PC and loaded off that. So that's us through to the Windows installer screen. I'm now going to show you how to install Windows 11. Over the next lot of screens, I'm going to pick the options that are relevant to me. If you have different options, pick the ones that apply to you. I'm from the United Kingdom, so I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click on Install Now. If you've got a Windows product key, go ahead and enter it in the box. If you don't have one, click I don't have a product key and pick the version of Windows you're going to get a product key for in the future. So I'm going to select Windows 11 Pro and click Next. We're going to have to accept the license terms, click Next. We're going to go for a custom install. If you've got more than one drive, you're going to pick where you want to install it. We've only got the one drive installed, so I'm going to select it and click Next. And this step will take a little bit of time, so I'm going to skip through it. Okay, I'm from the United Kingdom. I'm going to click on Yes and Yes again. I'm going to skip a second keyboard. We're going to have to name our device and click Next. I'm going to set the PC up for personal use. Click Next. So if you've got a Microsoft account, you can go ahead and put your details in. If you don't have one and want to create one, click here. If you want to go with an offline account, this is what I'm going to go for. We're going to go offline account. It's going to warn us that it's not that good. We're going to go skip for now. And then I need to enter my name and click Next. I'm then going to have to set up a password and 3 security questions. I'm going to let apps use my location, accept. Yes to find my device, accept. Just the required data, accept. No syncing. No again. No again. Okay, that's just through to Windows. The first thing I like to do is get Windows fully up to date. So we click on the Windows icon. We're going to click on Settings, Windows Updates, and we're going to click on Download Now. So what's going to happen is Windows is going to find a whole load of updates. We're going to let them install. Our PC is probably going to need to restart a number of times, but we're going to keep coming back here, checking for updates and not moving forward until they've all been installed. Okay, that's Windows fully up to date. Whenever I click on check for updates, there's no further updates available. Next thing to do is get our drivers installed. So we head over to our motherboards page on MSI's website, and we're going to click on the driver tab. We're going to select Windows 11 64-bit, and we're going to download some drivers. So the Intel chipset driver we're going to download. The onboard VGA drivers we don't need because we've got a dedicated graphics card. If you don't want to install the graphics card and use the integrated graphics, you're going to need to install this. The onboard audio drivers, we'll download the Realtek HD Universal driver. The SATA and RAID drivers we're not going to need, and we're going to download the management engine and the serial I/O drivers. Then we're going to head over to our downloads folder. Each of the drivers we've downloaded, we're going to right click and click extract all and extract, and we're going to repeat that for the other 3 files. Then we can select the compressed folders and delete them. We're going to install the drivers one by one, starting with the chipset. And then we just need to click on Finish. Heading back to the Downloads folder, we'll install the management engine. Click Yes, Next, Accept, Next, Next, and Finish. Back to the downloads, we've got the serial I/O. Yes, Next, Accept, Next, Next, Next. We're going to have to restart our computer, so we'll do that now. Then we've got our audio drivers. Click Yes, Next, and again we're going to have to restart our computer, so we'll click on Finish. Okay, so that's all our drivers installed from MSI's website. Next thing to do is get the drivers for our graphics card, so we'll head over to NVIDIA's page. Don't worry about noting down all these web addresses, you'll find them in the description. So I've already pre-filled in all the options that we want for our 3070 Ti, and I'm going to click on search. We can click on download and download again. We can click on open file and yes. Okay. We've got an option here where you can install just the graphics driver or the graphics driver with the GeForce experience, which is useful to keep things up to date. I'm just going to go with the graphics driver, so I'm going to click on it and agree and continue. We're going to go for an express installation, click next. And it is normal for the screen to flicker during the installation of the driver. Okay, so that's all our drivers installed. Next thing to do is get our RGB software installed. So we head back to our motherboards page in MSI's website, and this time rather than the drivers, we're going to click on the utility tab. We're going to select our operating system, and it's the MSI Center that we're going to want to install, so we'll click download. We can then head over to our downloads folder, right click on the file and click extract all and extract. And then we can double click on the file, click yes, and OK, install. And then we can click on finish. If we click on the Windows icon, we're going to find the MSI Center. So we right click on it and we want to run as an administrator, click yes. We're going to scan down to the bottom, click that we've read and agree with the terms and click on OK. We can click start now, next, next. Okay, so that's into the MSI Center, and it's actually the Mystic Lights application that we want to install by clicking install. We can then click on open. Okay, so that's through to Mystic Light. We're on the motherboard tab and we have something plugged into 1, 2 and 3 of the ARGB headers, nothing plugged into the 12 volt header. So I'm just going to select all. If you want to change the effects of what you plugged into each of the headers individually, you can do that. And you'll see things are currently set to rainbow. So I'm looking for a steady white, so click on steady, and we just need to type 255 into each of these boxes to get white. And then to change the lighting in the case, all we need to do is click on apply. So you'll notice now that all the lighting on the fans and also the AIO has changed to white. We can also change the lighting on the RAM by clicking on it. It is currently set to rainbow. So again, I think I'm going to go with a steady white. And then click on apply. And you'll see the RAM has also changed to white. On second thoughts, I think I'm going to leave the RAM on its default setting and click apply. And I think having a wee bit of light in with all the other white colors is actually going to look okay. So that's everything that we can change with Mystic Light. We also have RGB on our graphics card and RGB on our power supply, but we're going to need to get different software to control those. Okay, so we're over on our power supplies page, and if we scan down, there is a link to download the Cooler Master Master Plus software. So we'll click on download and then download now. We can then head over to our downloads folder, right click on the file and click extract all, extract. Click yes, OK, next, 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 install. And then we can click finish to launch the Master Plus software. Okay, so the Master Plus software has found a firmware update both for the power supply and also the wireless mouse that I'm using. So I'm going to click on install. And then we can click on OK. And then if we click on our power supply, we've got a range of options for what we want the color to be and what we want displayed on the screen. So I'm going to go for a static color, and I just want to get white to match the rest of the build. So I'm going to click on 255 here, and then you'll notice that all the lighting on the power supply has changed to white. So the power supply at the moment is currently displaying a range of information and it's just cycling through things. So I can adjust what the power supply displays. We can just have the logo, we can have the model, we can have the temperature, we can have the fan speed, we can have the power consumption, or we can have all of them. And it will just cycle through between displaying temperature, fan speed and power consumption over the right hand side. Or if we want, we can turn the lighting off by clicking here. And as well, the LED mode on the fan underneath can also be turned off if we want. Again, I'm just going to leave that on a static white, and I think I'm going to leave all the information being displayed, so it will just cycle through between temperature, fan speed and power consumption. So we'll click on apply, and then we can close things down. One thing to point out is you probably notice the light flickering on the power supply. That's just due to the camera frame rate, and the power supply in real life doesn't flicker like that. Okay, the last bit of RGB software we need to get is to control our graphics card, and it's the Firestorm utility that we want, and actually there's a link here to download it. We can then head over to our download folder. We can right click on the file and click extract all, extract. And then we can click on the Firestorm utility. We're going to have to click on more info, run anyway, and yes, and okay. Next, next, install, and finish. Okay, we can click on the Firestorm utility and click yes. And we're going to allow access, and it's actually the Spectra tab that we're going to want for the lighting. Okay, so we can control the individual components of our graphics card, or at least synchronize turned on to get them all to change together. And then we've got a range of different effects. For example, we can go for a static color, we can have a static red, yellow, green, blue, white. We can go, for example, for breathe. We've also got more animated effects. I quite like the duet one. I think that also looks quite good. But I think to match in with the color theme that we've got here, I'm just going to head over to the standard effects and go for a static white. I'm also going to change to this effect when the graphics card is active as well. Okay, so that's the PC looking great. Last thing we need to do is head over to the BIOS. So before we do that, I'm going to make sure we've got the latest version of the BIOS on a USB stick. So we click on BIOS. We can see the latest version here is from the 1st to the 6th, so I'm going to click on download. We can then head over to our downloads folder. We're going to click on the BIOS file, and this is actually our BIOS file that we want, so we're going to copy this and paste it onto a USB drive that I have plugged into the computer. Then we need to restart our computer, so we go down to the power options and click restart. Whenever the screen goes black, we're going to start pressing the delete key, and that is going to take us into the BIOS. Okay, so taking a look at the version of the BIOS that we have installed, we do have a later version installed on the USB drive. So the first thing I'm going to do is update the BIOS. And if you are going to update your BIOS, you're better doing it at the start, because when you update it, the settings are quite often will get wiped. So we're going to click on the M flash, click yes. Then we need to select our BIOS file. So we click on the USB drive, and that's our BIOS file here. So we click on it. It's going to ask us, are we sure we want to select this file? We're going to select yes. And then it's going to go ahead and update the BIOS. Now it's really important your PC doesn't lose power during this, because if it does, there's a risk of you bricking your motherboard. And in general, you shouldn't really be updating the BIOS unless the new version offers features that you need, or you're having problems with your computer, because if it goes wrong, you can very definitely brick your motherboard. Okay, so that's us back into the BIOS, and you can see we're now running the latest version. So the first thing I want to do is have a look at our memory. So you can see our memory is currently running at 4800 megahertz, but it can run at 6000 megahertz. So that's XMP profile 1. So I'm going to go ahead and enable XMP profile number 1. Next, I want to have a look at our fans. So we click on the fan info, and then we're going to click on the settings. So taking a look at the fans that we have got installed, we've got our CPU fans, which are the fans on either side of the radiator. They're currently running in PWM mode, taking the temperature off the CPU, and running in smart fan mode, which is just the way I want them to. If we go over to our pump is currently running in PWM mode. It only has a 3-pin connector, so it should be in DC mode. And I normally don't run the smart fan mode on the pump. So taking a look at the system fan headers, we've got 3 fans plugged into system fan headers. So we'll click on them. They're currently running in DC mode, but they can run in PWM mode. They've all got 4-pin connectors, so we'll click on PWM and we'll enable the smart fan mode. We've also got 2 options here. We can have the temperature source set to the CPU, or we can change it over to the system. Having it set at the system, because the system temperature tends to vary much less, will prevent that noise we hear the fans suddenly ramping up and down whenever the CPU is under a little bit of stress, because just the fans in the radiator will ramp up and down at that stage. So if you notice your PC is quite noisy, that's one of the things you can do for these fans, is change them over to the system. But I think I'm going to be doing quite a bit of detailed thermal testing, so I'm going to leave them set to CPU for now. So I'm just going to change all the other fans to the same settings, so PWM, smart fan mode, and taking the temperature off the CPU, and system fan 6 as well. I also am likely to be plugging other fans in during the thermal testing, so I don't have anything plugged in here now. I'm just going to all change them to PWM and smart fan mode to save me any issues later on during the thermal testing. Last thing to do is head over to the advanced mode, and I want to enable the resizable bar. So we click on motherboard settings, advanced, PCIe, and resizable bar is currently disabled. We're going to click on it and click enable. Okay, so to save those settings, we just need to press the X at the top. It's going to give a summary of everything that we have done. We just need to confirm it, and it will re-enter Windows. Okay, that's us back into Windows, and the first thing I want to do is check the RAM's running at the correct speed. So we right click on the Windows icon, click on Task Manager, click on More Details, click on the Performance, and click on Memory. So we can see that our RAM is running at 6000 megahertz. And then just to confirm the resizable bar has been enabled, we'll click here, click on NVIDIA Settings, click Agree and Continue, and then we're going to click on System Information. And then we can see resizable bar has been enabled, so we can close this down. So that's the build complete, and the PC is not only running great, but looking great as well. What I'm planning on doing now is some detailed thermal testing and coming up with the best cooling configuration for the Lancool III video. Now that video might be a little bit behind this video releasing. I have a holiday coming up, and I will literally just be back when this video releases, and I don't think I'm going to have time to do the thermal testing before I go, but I would expect it to be up within a week of this video coming out. I'm probably not going to do a case review because I spent so much time pointing out all the case features at the start of this video, and I don't want to duplicate things. So hopefully you have found this video useful. If you are thinking of building in this case, you definitely are going to want to check out that thermal testing video, and I'll put a link to it in the description. So if you have found this video useful, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.